Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. Introducing your host for this evening first. He is the host with the most from the West Coast, the Bay Area Brawler, Skyler Greenberg. And his partner, he has colonized, energized, and revolutionized the podcasting wrestling world today. Your Colonial Champion, Sean.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is me, the Bay Area Brawler. I am back from vacation, and I'm feeling refreshed, I'm feeling energized, and I'm feeling something in a way. I don't know what way you're talking about, but that way. Anyways, too many ways. This is going to be an interesting show, back for the first time in a couple weeks, and we're going to go
and it shows.
Boo the peanut gallery. Shut up. Anyways, we're going to come back, and we're going to go ahead and talk about the happenings of the last few weeks and pay tribute to a legend of Japan. And I'm doing it with the man of the hour, the man of the power, too sour to be sweet. He is the Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty.
I'll have you know, sir, that I'm not feeling too bitter today. I'm actually in a great mood, and I'm sure folks you're wondering where your Extreme Rules review is. Well, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, and on the live stream for Extreme Rules, which you can find on the channel, don't forget to like, share, subscribe so you can know when any of those are happening. But on the live stream, I said there's a very real possibility with my opera schedule and Skylar's I'm on vacation schedule that the Extreme Rules pay-per-view review was going to be delayed, or that our schedule will be erratic. Do you remember those words being uttered, Skylar?
Yes, I do.
So it turns out that I have not, because of this opera, had any time to do any sort of editing whatsoever. However, that's not like the Extreme Rules pay-per-view wasn't reviewed. We did it on TAW Gaming. We were going to do it as a simulcast, and it just ended up not being in the cards. But in the description of this video, you will find that Extreme Rules review. So you want to know what we thought about it, Josh again, and myself, and Grammar Note Sky. You can find that all there. So we're going to be moving on, as Skylar said, with the Antonio Inoki show as promised. And Sky, this is going to be all you, because first of all, let me be the first to tell you, on behalf of the entire Court-Martail podcast family, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you. Again, I'll probably send Sean a couple of pictures so that you guys can see it. But again, I had a great time in Germany. I had a great time in Czech Republic. Sadly, I could not find my own Ludwig Kaiser. They just don't make them.
Well, they don't make them like Ludwig Kaiser without charging you a fair amount of money, I'd imagine. That's...
Yeah, I just couldn't find a good Ludwig Kaiser. So
that's okay.
He's not going to be wrestling for me in the National Wrestling League next year. Sad.
That's okay, because he's going to be doing plenty in ACPW, which, by the way, folks, next week, that's what's going down. ACPW versus NWL. It is going to be the semifinals, I think, now?
Semifinals and finals of the Hart Foundation Cup. No, not Hart Foundation Cup.
The World Cup. The World Cup that's been going on for quite some time. So we got ourselves a big show going down there. As well as ACPW, we've got a lot developing, and we've heard, a little bit of a teaser that we're going to be hearing from former ACPW champion Titus O'Neil. We're going to get an update on his condition next week. So a little bit of teaser for both shows. But Skylar, because now you have come back and you need to be reintegrated into the fold here, we decided to give you the entire ship steering wheel. I'm going to let you direct the entire show from here on out, as you did a wonderful intro that was not interrupted at all by anyone. And now I'm going to continue not interrupting you and pass you the baton so we can talk about a wrestling great, a political great, an all-time great.
That's right. But before we get there, there's been a lot of things that have been happening basically since I left for vacation that we need to talk about. I know some of the stuff is a little bit old, but it bears worth repeating in the news of the week. That is right, folks. It is the news of the week with the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg at your service. And Sean, there's been a lot of things that have been going on the past few weeks, and I want to talk about them because I feel like some of the things that have happened haven't been played up enough, and we need to discuss these things.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I did a solo show, and I covered Bray Wyatt again. And I did touch on a little bit of news, but even in just the 2 weeks since, it has been a very jam-packed session of news as far as what has been coming out from certain parties about certain people and where certain individuals are doing certain things that we didn't expect that they'd be doing. So why don't you break it down for us, Sky? What do we got?
Right. Basically, the news is going to break down into the AEW section and the WWE section.
Like we normally do.
Yep. And we're going to go to everybody's favorite coked-out promoter, Tony Khan himself.
Yes. Whether it's Coke or any other sort of pharmaceutical, we'll never know.
Yeah. So basically, a couple weeks ago, did you hear about the Tony Khan Ariel Helwani interview?
You know, I just heard Corny talk about it, Jim Cornette, and I heard some sound bites between the two, and from the sound bites, why did Tony even bother going on the show?
To promote his AEW.
But see, this is okay, folks. If you don't know what we're talking about, Ariel Helwani had an interview with Tony Khan that Helwani afterwards said was the most frustrating interview he ever had, and basically every good question that he asked, Tony Khan said, "Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that."
I mean, Sean, don't you want to hear about MJF?
No, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about it. I can't talk about it.
Cody Rhodes wrestling in WWE. Don't you want to talk about that, Tony?
I can't talk about that. Sorry, I don't want to.
What about Saraya and Paige and her health? Is she medically cleared to wrestle?
You know, the thing is I just don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that.
See, we basically just saved you 76 minutes and 30 seconds of Tony Khan doing that the entire time.
If you're not going to say anything to somebody, why even have the damn interview? Why would you do this?
It's because Tony Khan really, really does want to promote AEW in any way he can by visiting every single person with a podcast or a radio show or whatever and get his name out there, but he doesn't want to do anything to really sell anything.
But here's the problem. Tony has done a masterful job of getting the wrestling media to surround him and to perpetually blow him for what he does as far as his booking is concerned. Tony's even said recently that his whole goal is to be Booker of the Year, the prestigious Booker of the Year. So he's convinced the wrestling media to basically just hype him up. And
right. The big thing is that Ariel Helwani is not a member of that group. He's not a member of the Dave Meltzers or the Brian Alvarez's that continuously suck Tony Khan's dick.
Yeah.
Like, Ariel Helwani is a former mixed martial arts reporter. He's done work with ESPN. He has legitimacy to his name, despite the fact that some people want to delegitimize him for his WWE biases, supposedly.
Well, because he's apparently Nick Khan is his agent or was his agent. I don't know if that
former agent, and Ariel Helwani does work for WWE whenever they do stuff in the United Kingdom.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's definitely a line to cross, and I don't know whether Helwani would cross that line. It's because for the most part, everything I've ever seen of his has been fairly down the middle. You know, it doesn't seem like he'd be somebody trying to like dig up dirt for WWE. I don't know. It just, in either case, if Tony really thought that was a problem, he would have figured that out prior to him going on to the show. And then he wouldn't have done the show. So I don't. It's like, but right. Tony's not used to people not jacking him off. That's the biggest problem here, is that he's not used to that.
Right, and the interview itself is not the interesting part because, again, it's Tony Khan playing deflection. It's what Ariel Helwani said afterwards that really has got people on fire. May I say the transcript of his Ariel Helwani
Yes,
words?
Please do.
All right, there are basically 6 paragraphs, so I'm going to read this as quick as I can. But give me your quick takes when I'm finished reading them, all right?
You got it.
Whatever I'm going to say here is going to piss off the AEW supermarks. But I'll just say this. one of the most frustrating and, to a degree, not so fun interviews of my career. Because, as you may have seen, he didn't want to answer anything.
True.
All true. Now look, you're going to come on here and promote X, Y, and Z, and great, I'll play that dance with you. And I did it at the beginning, but you got to give us something. It's not even tell me how you are feeling. Give me something. Don't just say, not going to talk about it. Not going to talk about it. Doesn't serve me. Doesn't serve me.
You know what Tony should have done, and I agree kind of with Cornette about this, is he should have actually, if he wanted to be a wrestler so bad, he should have actually started like cutting some promos and talking about people. And, you know, when he asks those questions, he starts hyping the people up and try to get some of these guys over. The problem is Tony is doing AEW more like a stage show than a wrestling program.
Right, and I think it very much is revealed again in what Ariel Helwani says next. That's not the way you do it. Look at some of the great promoters over the last 30 years. There's a way of giving us the answer, even though it's not the answer I want, but you're giving us some sort of answer. Something to chew on, as opposed to just shutting it all down. Not very enjoyable. I think, Sean, you again, me and you are both sports fans. So we've seen post-game press conferences with coaches talking about the game or talking about players, or players having interviews after the game, right?
Yeah, it's very easy to say a whole lot of nothing while still putting over your guys. It's not that hard.
Like, for example, Bill Belichick is one of the most boring interviews ever because he says a lot of things, but doesn't mean anything, but he will get you an answer, just not the answer you may want.
Now, here's an interesting question. Tony, who juggles a bajillion different jobs, which he doesn't give any of them any proper attention to, in all of that time, has anyone taught Tony basic media training?
It doesn't show.
It doesn't show.
What Tony Khan does is just, let's talk about this, and this, and not about this, and this.
He goes on. Well, maybe he does have media training. He's like, I'm not going to talk about that, but let's talk about this, and go on and on and on. And the problem is, people don't know how to turn that off. And I feel like that's why Helwani got so upset. It's like he saw that Tony was just going to tangent any way that Tony wanted the tangent to talk about what he wanted to talk about, instead of the actual questions or answers to questions that Helwani asked.
Right. And again, Ariel Helwani continues. The enjoyment of getting to talk to the guy who founded this great property that has done a lot of great things in 3 years fizzled out rather quickly when I realized the only answers he's going to give me are these long, drawn-out answers promoting all this stuff going on these tangents about Chris Jericho and this and that.
Yeah.
But it's this part that really gets me, that really has me saying, yes, Ariel, you're saying the right thing. Are you ready, Sean?
Let's hear it.
If you're saying right now with a straight face that the AEW product is better than the WWE product, you're just a liar. You're just an absolute liar. If there's no ifs, ands, or buts. The WWE product is infinitely better, infinitely more interesting, and there's a freaking brawl happening backstage each and every week, it seems. Meanwhile, it's all kumbaya on the WWE side of things. Like, if you're going to be a super fan, be a super fan. But also tell it like it is. 6 months ago, that wasn't the case. But right here, this second, if you're going to sit here and say that AEW is a better product, you're an absolute liar.
Well, I don't disagree with it. I mean, have we really ever disagreed with that? There was just a time that AEW just had intrigue because Punk had come back and they had Danielson and, you know, this was right once we figured out that there was only a couple people who avoided the AEW formula of being exciting for 3 weeks and then disappearing from the face of the earth. And there was maybe how long did it last? 6 months tops?
Like, basically the time that you can say that AEW was really, really good and hitting on all cylinders was during the CM Punk and MJF feud. And
those shows still kind of sucked. It's just that there was less suckage on the show than normal, but you got to figure out ratios, though. We're talking about like maybe 3 good matches or 3 or 4 good matches on a 12-match card instead of, 4 good matches on a 6-match card. Or, it's just ratio-wise, AEW has had a lot of shows that people say they had all the buzz and they had the media buzz, but were they ever truly better than WWE, save for WrestleMania Night 2 this year?
I think in a way, yes, it is. Because again, let's think about the beginning of this year. The Royal Rumble was shit.
Yeah.
The Royal Rumble was shit, and Royal Rumble didn't create any excitement. WrestleMania Night 1 was good, but there was a lot of nostalgia baiting with Stone Cold Steve Austin, particularly. And that show, except for maybe 2 matches, really wasn't that great of a night.
No.
Honestly.
At that time, but at that time, you and I had also basically said, fuck both of these shows. Because it wasn't too long after that we had the Crown of Thorns incident, and we realized just how stupid that they were going to be on national television. And have you noticed that they've been asked to keep the language down and everyone is still swearing? They just have bleeped it out.
You can get away with it with the multiple censor bleeps, right?
I suppose. And it's just still.
Right. Now, the way Ariel Helwani says it, I think he does take a lot of things personally, and he really shouldn't, because if you listen to any Tony Khan interview or listen to his Twitter, he does the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know what Helwani expected. I mean, do your research, bud. Like, have you seen the way that he conducts interviews? Like, Tony is not going to give you a straightforward answer, even if you pinned him to a wall and threw a knife at his face. It's not.
Well, speaking of dangerous situations, we should probably move on from this because there's a lot of other interesting things that happens.
Yes.
But we're going to stick with AEW. We're going to go to what happened on Wednesday, October 19th. Dynamite. Jon Moxley versus Adam Heyman Page. The incident.
Yeah.
So, Moxley and Heyman Page wrestle an indie match.
Yep.
And what happens during the indie match is a little incident involving Heyman Page taking a hideous lariat / clothesline.
And he lands on his head.
And he lands on his head. He gets a concussion, gets knocked out. The match has to be stopped right away because they realized, oh shit, he is not getting up from that.
Yeah, and that... I'm conflicted. Okay. Nobody wants to see that. Okay? Nobody wants to see that. It was a freak accident. You know, I hate to be the one who's like, well, shit happens. But I don't think this was anybody's fault. This is freak happening. I mean, I'm glad he's okay. You know, for the most part. I mean, I'm glad a concussion was all that he had. There was worries that he may have broken his neck with the way that was angled.
Right, agree. Like, nobody wishes ill will on these people. And we were glad that Heyman Page, despite having a concussion, is otherwise okay.
However.
Yes, go ahead.
I cannot help but feel a little satisfied that the person who was rewarded for being the shit stirrer that caused a fight between Punk and the Bucks and Omega and Ace Steel didn't get some level of comeuppance until something like... I don't want it to be this that does it, but I can't help but feel a small level of satisfaction that he got something happened. You know, I don't know. I feel weird about saying that, but it's like he shouldn't have been rewarded for that behavior, and I'm glad that in some way karma did some level of justice to it. Like a receipt came down. I know that sounds shitty to say, but it was a receipt that I feel was somewhat earned.
This feels like the whole thing of, yeah, it happens. Because of course it happens. This is AEW's wrestling style. I hate to say it, but anything they do can cause injury. And listen, wrestling is not a safe sport, obviously. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
Anyone can get injured on anything. And as you said, a lariat is not the most dangerous move. It's not the worst move that AEW's done.
Freak accident.
But at the same time, it's like, of course it's these two and Page getting injured because he took a bump the wrong way. Like, the self-trained wrestlers.
Yeah, well, and another thing is, and I hate to address Corny again here, but he made a great point on his podcast of everybody now has to do the in and out bump when taking a clothesline. And it's something that I didn't really think about, but it's true. Everyone has to do the entire flip around and land on that instead of just taking a clothesline like a normal human being. And I think that it's just that the standard that's been set by everyone trying to outdo each other's moves rather than learning how to work a crowd and like get them invested emotionally has led to issues like this where people are trying to do too much and maybe aren't versed enough in it to do it properly sometimes. You know, I'm not saying this was an instance of that. This was, from what I could see, just bad timing. And it happens, you know, it's one of those things. But at the same time, at what point are we going to reach the point of no return with how far we can one-up each other with how good with these major moves?
Right, it's just like everyone's trying to repeat the 2005 Paul London spot from the Royal Rumble.
Right. How far is too far? And who's it going to be? Who ends up crippled on this show? Because I said before, Tony's begging for it at this point.
Right. I mean, look at the way that these people wrestle. The match had several other dangerous spots, like a deadeye on the apron and suplexes and tombstone pile drivers. Too much tombstone pile drivers.
Because moves mean nothing in AEW. And the worst part was, that wasn't even the most dangerous spot on the show.
No.
Everybody was throwing potatoes. It's like, if you were a prospective wrestler, how could you look at what goes on in AEW and go, I want to work there?
Right. And it's like, this is a move or a match that's not even going to be remembered in 6 months because it's a TV show match. It's not, and it wasn't an exceptionally great match. It was okay from the little bits I saw, but it's like, this isn't a match we're going to talk about 10 years from down the line. So why are you taking that much of a risk for something that doesn't matter?
Well, remember how much of a risk the Deadeye with the Crown of Thorns onto the table, onto the outside was?
Yeah.
And the only reason that people remember it is that I keep bringing it up, and it's only like 20 people who watch this on a weekly basis. You know, the rest of them show up later, but at the same, but you know, and we thank each and every one of you for being here. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. But it's the facts that the only reason that that is mentioned is because we keep bringing it up. Because I haven't heard anyone else mention that at all since it happened.
Because why would it? It's not a memorable match except for that spot. And even then, it's already been forgotten about.
Because nothing matters. None of these matches matter. You could say they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. But at some point, when you eat enough sliced bread, you get fucking sick of sliced bread. You'd rather not eat any carbohydrates. Get a fucking cantaloupe or something.
Plain white bread with butter on it.
And one sesame seed.
And one sesame seed. And speaking of someone who's not sharing his sesame seeds because right now he doesn't have a job, Ace Steel has been released.
Well, we all knew this was coming. I mean, it was just a matter of when, not if. What were you gonna do? He was the one guy who had no protection.
Right, but what this is interesting is because of the whole thing of what's going on right now backstage, and a lot of the view backstage is that nobody really likes CM Punk. Oh my goodness, what a shocker!
Well, it's hard hearing the truth. And AEW was founded on not the truth. It was founded on lies and that, you know, sports-based presentation, lie. What the Young Bucks and Omega's drawing power were in the States, lie. What their wrestling ability was, lie. So when CM Punk comes in and tells the truth, everyone who's involved with being in on the lie, particularly Chris Jericho, who's benefiting the most from it right now, people are gonna hate on it. You know, I still think Punk was immature for airing all of that out on television. I also think Tony Khan was stupid for not kicking him under the table and telling him, shut the fuck up, do this backstage. So we don't air this out on TV, so we don't end up having this mess happen to begin with. But
okay, hang on 1 second. I'm at the prefaces of a rant.
Please rant away.
When All In, basically the crowdfunded show, right, that came out in what, 2017, 2018?
The one with the Dick Druids, right? With Hangman Adam Page. We should have known then. We should have known about Hangman Adam Page then, but no, we held on to hope.
We held on to hope that was just a one-time thing.
Yep. How wrong we were.
But that whole show in general was basically a crowdfunded show by fans saying, listen, we don't want to watch WWE and Vince McMahon's product anymore. We want something else. Please, wrestling, give us something else. And the independent scene said, you know what? Let's try something. Let's see if we can put on a show and see if anyone would be interested in helping to fund a company that can be the opposite of what WWE and Vince McMahon was. And that was basically the genesis of AEW and what it was at the beginning, right?
That was the concept.
AEW, never forget, was created because it was created to spite Vince McMahon. And Tony Khan would be the billionaire that would be the person behind the scenes, not getting involved as much as Vince was. And he would be the one to allow the wrestlers to finally do what they wanted to do and allow the wrestlers to really steer the ship and make a quality show that the fans wanted, because the fans felt like the wrestlers could make a better show than Vince McMahon could.
Right.
And AEW, admittedly, in the beginning was intriguing because this was the first time something like this had been created since the territory days. A company built by a wrestler's basically current. Like, there were a couple wrestling companies, but none as big as AEW, none with the backing, and most importantly, none with the national television, right?
Agreed. I mean, not since Ted Turner bought Crockett had something like this happen.
Right. There was a second company to finally fight Vince McMahon and WWE. And for a time, there was a time where AEW was doing it well. But the more that Tony Khan has been sticking himself into this situation, the more that Tony Khan has been sticking himself into AEW's basically everything,
because
the more the show has suffered.
Yeah. But here's the interesting thing, Sky. If we go back and we watch the shows where we felt AEW had the momentum, they weren't that good. We were holding on to a very small thread. I think for a very long time, I'm going to akin it to when it's like the Jamarcus Russell effect. Throwing some football references in. For those of you who don't know, Jamarcus Russell was one of the most overhyped first-round draft picks in history of quarterbacking in the NFL. Everybody said he was going to be the guy who won a bajillion Super Bowls, and he came into the NFL and shat the bed. And even the games that he won, he wasn't that good in them. And at this point, AEW, but people wanted him, and he signed on to what, like 6 teams? Because people wanted to believe that he still could be what people hyped him to be. And he never did well on any of those teams. He's considered one of the biggest NFL busts in history. And I think the only reason that there's a couple shows on AEW that were like, oh, that was a good time for AEW, was just that we had like either a good Cody match, one good Cody match, or a good CM Punk and MJF match. So maybe 2 matches, but most of the time just 1 match on the show, and something that was surprisingly passable. But what kept it feeling so important was that WWE was getting more boring, and AEW, for as many flaws as they had a couple glimpses of excitement, but the most of that emotion, I think, was more for the hope of potential of what it used to be or what it could be, but it was unproven from the start, and it never really got its ground from the start. with a handful of exceptions. And that, I think, is what is people are starting to recognize, is that with a small glimmer of momentum, there is a lot of things in AEW that are mostly garbage, and most of their shows have been garbage. It's just that now that WWE has started looking halfway competent, we are now seeing more just how much AEW has been garbage.
Right. It's the situation of AEW finally being exposed for what it truly has always been. And I struggle with this because I really want AEW to do well.
Me too.
Again, the AEW hater of this group, as I've been dubbed.
As you've self-proclaimed, sir.
Well, yeah, but also I've been the hardest one on AEW
in
reviews.
You have.
Because I think it's just because I was really hopeful that they were going to be something different. And no, they're not. If you listen to any AEW show, it's billions upon billions of moves that are long. It's stupid gimmicks from the indies. It's Chris Jericho reliving every Monday Night Raw segment from 2002 onwards.
And he's got more influence on the show than ever, and the ratings have reflected same.
Right. It's like we want to give AEW everything, every chance we can, but we just don't. I just can't do it no more. And it's not like AEW is really setting the market on fire right now with the wrestling. They're not.
No, they're not. I mean, and that's, another thing too. And then, you get Tony buying Ring of Honor and basically is trying to keep the corpse alive with a 12-volt battery. And it's just not, it just doesn't work. And he's got 5 shows of AEW that he's booking, quote unquote booking. And Jericho has got more power than ever, which we have been testamented. That Jericho has been one of the worst parts of AEW since he's been there.
Right, and it's not even necessarily that he's been that bad recently. It's just that he's been bad the entire time, except for a 2-month span when he was their world champion.
It's his agenda that is the problem. Jericho in the ring is what Jericho is going to be in the ring. There's only so far you can go, but it's the agenda of what Jericho is getting to do and is allowing, the amount that he's going to be in Tony's ear and is in Tony's ear is what is really starting to hurt the show. And it's not like the Bucks and Omega were doing it any favors, because they weren't, but it's not like Jericho is either. I think that they've got people like the Acclaimed that are starting to make more waves. They've got stars that people want to try and invest in, but until they get somebody competent in charge, or Tony listens to somebody competent, because there's plenty of them there, but their eyes must be just lifeless. I know JR's are.
JR is basically the representation of people like me, Sean, who just were hoping that AEW would be different and realizing it wasn't. And
and I'm afraid here, and I don't believe Meltzer's report that they're going to buy out Punk's contract. I don't know that for a fact, because I know that there's interest from WWE. There's been whispers about that. None of that is confirmed at all. But it's just, if Punk leaves, let me ask you this, guy. If Punk leaves and they buy out his contract, and then not too long after that, the Bucks and Omega return gloriously, and there's, nothing's ever wrong, and they finally rid the show of its cancer, what do you think the public opinion is going to be of AEW and Tony Khan?
It depends on who you ask, because if you ask the hardcore AEW superfans that Ariel Helwani is talking about, that are going to mercilessly defend AEW because at this point they don't have anything left, they're going to say, finally, CM Punk is gone. Now that the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega are back, we can start enjoying our product again.
And what about the rest of the world?
The rest of the world's not going to care.
Do you think it reflects poorly on Tony if he does buy out CM Punk's contract, considering the undoubted statistic that CM Punk brought more ratings than anyone else on his program?
If Tony Khan buys out CM Punk, I actually think that would be the quickest way to resolve all this and just get this over with. Just pay CM Punk probably an exorbitant amount of money to get away, not have to deal with his headache anymore, and just move on to something else.
Now, let me ask you another question. If CM Punk's contract is bought out and he waits 90 days, so let's say
if it gets bought out, he wouldn't have to wait 90 days.
Well, do you think with Triple H in charge, and Triple H now with the much older sense of knowing and doing what is best for business, do you think Triple H, who has mended many fences for WWE, tries to mend the fence with CM Punk?
It depends on if CM Punk is ready to mend that particular fence with Triple H. Is he ready to build the bridge that got burnt down that day in Cleveland, Ohio?
And then let me ask you this question as well. Let's say that they do, and Cody's back and Punk are back at the same time. Who do you have mainline WrestleMania and take the title off Roman? And if The Rock, is the one to take the title off of Roman at WrestleMania with CM Punk on the card.
Forget that. Cody Rhodes and CM Punk are both in the Rumble. And number 30 is The Rock.
Oh my God. That would be amazing. Except Punk, there's no way Punk would go for that.
The Rumble is going to be must-see TV this year.
Well, I think it's going to be the most hyped we're going to be for it. I wish they were not going to do a men's and a women's Rumble, but I know they are.
At least they could, do it on different days.
You know, why don't they just be realistic about how many women are in the Rumble? It's like, okay, look, our women's roster is just noticeably smaller. It's not anyone's fault. It's just, we're going to do a 20 Rumble for the women because we only have that many, instead of trying to bring back the same legends every single year.
I don't know. They are trying to fix the women's division. They are making new debuts and new hires and new wrestlers. I don't know how successful it's going to be, but they're trying to beef up the women's division. It's just difficult because AEW has a lot of the women's talent that I'm sure WWE would like to have back.
Well, and I'll tell you this too. It does score points for Triple H that, as far as pay-per-views go, most of the matches that involve women are like singles matches. You know, we're not getting many multi-women shit fests on these shows where we were guaranteed pretty much won every single pay-per-view with Founder Vince. It was thankfully...
Yeah, but there also hasn't been any situations that would require a multi-women's match yet.
True, but that didn't stop Vince in the past. And that's kind of what my point is. At least, in Triple H's credit, that alone makes me take the women's division more seriously. Not having Liv Morgan as champion helps me take the women's division more seriously.
Until Liv Morgan goes to the top rope with Sonya Deville to do a superplex onto a bunch of chairs, and after it happens, Liv Morgan starts smiling in ecstasy.
Again,
Liv Morgan. That's really hot. I like that, but not in my wrestling.
Yeah, and remind me why Liv Morgan was champion for 3 months.
So that little girls and men could have a person to jack off to.
It was the incels. The incels did it the entire time.
It was the incels and the little girls.
Damn. A lethal combination.
But by the way, the whole thing I want to ask again, just because, let's just end the news of the week on this. The whole idea of Triple H's booking, because I posed this question to you at the end of the Extreme Rules review.
The link of which is in the description, just as a reminder. Right,
about how much Triple H is trying to change the roster. We've had the report that came out recently that WWE wants to do a UK show, kind of like Clash of the Castle, every year, and I think the United Kingdom deserves it.
Agreed.
They definitely bring energy whenever they hold a show like Clash of the Castle or the Wembley Stadium SummerSlam, and they also want to do less gimmicks involved pay-per-view events. Well, okay, premium live events.
I'll call them premium live events if they don't involve gimmick matches every goddamn month. That is, I mean, more than adequate trade-off in my book. You know, like all I said at that time was make gimmick matches mean something again. That's all I care about. You know.
But now it sounds like WWE is going to try and do less shows that are around the gimmick. So maybe less Extreme Rules, maybe less TLC or Hell in a Cells.
Please, can we get rid of Money in the Bank? I know everybody's like, oh my God, it's a 5th pay-per-view. It's not. It's the biggest B pay-per-view, and it needs to be done away with. The gimmick itself doesn't, but it needs to.
Okay, see, I like Money in the Bank as a match and a concept. The show idea, yeah, I guess.
To keep the match, just have it. You can have it on the show. Just don't name the show Money in the Bank.
You know what? Just move Money in the Bank back to WrestleMania. Have it be the multi-person match that gets the men and the women on the show.
That I would like. Except how do you do? What are you going to do? 2 of them at WrestleMania, 1 each night?
Yeah.
Okay.
You separate it so that way you have one-on-one show on the. The good thing about WrestleMania
That's a thought.
2 nights now is that you have a chance to breathe and relax between the 14 matches because you have 7 matches one night, 7 matches the next night.
You know, I actually wouldn't mind that because 9 times out of 10 they have a ladder match on WrestleMania anyway. Or like almost every one I can recall over the past several years, not even counting the Money in the Bank ones. They've got a ladder match there somewhere. You know, you might as well just have it be the Money in the Bank match, you know, on both nights. You know, have the women do one and the men do the other. I'd be down for that, honestly. If it meant that no more Money in the Bank as a pay-per-view, again, worthy trade.
I think it just depends on what is the long-term future under WWE. What is Triple H going to do? Is he going to fuse the titles so that there's only one world title for the men, for the women tag team? I mean, it kind of basically is already, but, you know.
I wouldn't mind that, honestly. I mean, I think Triple H knows that right now when it comes to, not roster space, but when it comes to star power, his pool is fairly limited. And he has to maximize on the pool of stars he's got, and he can't do that if there's a bajillion titles to consider. And I think that that's what he's more leaning towards, at least that seems to me. And again, it's going to take time with Triple H, I think, but I still feel like it's heading in the right direction. It's just going to take time.
Yeah, agreed. So let's go ahead and cut the news off here, and let's go to our topic now. And our topic is one that Sean's going to have almost nothing to say about.
Oh, a little, but not a lot.
Yep. And that is Japanese wrestling. And we lost all the American viewers.
Vague. Josh Geddon's still here, though. Chugging his monster.
In the Indian fan base, because the Indian fan base also watches New Japan for some reason.
We love you.
We love you. Great Khali is saying hi with his giant
Great
hands.
Khali gets more Instagram likes than anyone in the States. Just saying. Have you seen his Instagram? Him just like lifting up a barbell gets like 100,000 likes. Like, good God.
Yeah, but that's because the Indian fans don't know kayfabe was broken in 2008. Anyways.
They don't need to.
The whole thing, I just want to do a quick conversation because this is not really a big one. It's just Japanese wrestling is one of the most interesting and distinct styles of wrestling that's kind of different from American style, different from Lucha Libre, different from British style. Because, Sean, how much Japanese wrestling do you watch?
So, I watch almost zero of modern Japanese wrestling because, in a lot of ways, Japanese wrestling now has gone to shit in a very similar way that American wrestling has. And it's kind of infested them, but in a different way. A lot of Japanese wrestling I see now is from DDT and the stupid shit that they'll do there that AEW, of course, teamed up with. And there's a lot of really dumb things that they've tried to do kind of just to transform what wrestling is and is about. And I just don't think it's worked. But classic Japanese wrestling, the stuff that people like Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba promoted, which was this massive notion and this really painstaking attempt to demonstrate that wrestlers were the best athletes, combat athletes in the world, and that people were really convinced that they were. So a lot of the style that Japan thrived in were very borderline, incredibly stiff, half shoot, half real competition that turned into absolute clonkers of matches, not in a bad way, but just slapping meat back and forth in a very intense way. And it developed from a very early from Inoki and Baba and went all the way through, Ricky Dozan prior to them, going on all the way into the Misawa era and then Chono and the other big three. I know I'm going to miss a lot of names, and even into the more modern era, which took more of an emphasis on technical ability in the very similar way that the Ruthless Aggression era did for American wrestling in a lot of ways with WWE, as far as the more focused on technique and a little bit less on, the bigger strikers. And it's very interesting how it developed into what it is now, where there's certain leagues that still take it very seriously, but also ones that will make such a joke and a mockery of it. And finding the balance between the two is now equally as difficult there as it is here. And that's sad to say, given the legacy of Japanese wrestling and what the kind of style and was and how it's been portrayed by some of the all-time greats.
I have to say, for a man who doesn't really watch Japanese wrestling, that was pretty good.
Well, thank you. And, and the other thing, too, it's like a lot of the Japanese wrestling that I've seen involves American wrestlers, because a lot of them came along and were a big part of Japanese wrestling and really helped make Japanese wrestlers look and feel more important, and vice versa. A lot of guys benefited from their times in Japan. It's not that way now. It's still, people still act like it is, but it's not that way now. But people like Stan Hansen had an incredible legacy in Japan. There's a great match in Japan between Stan and Andre that I remember really liking. And I've seen glimpses. Scott Norton is a guy that never really popped in American wrestling. He was in the NWO, which like a bajillion people were, but he was an IWGP World Champion. Multiple, they loved him in Japan. Vader got his licks in from Japan to start out. That's where that basically came from. And so there was a lot of American wrestlers who I've gone back and studied some of their Japan work to see how inherently different the style is. And it is a little bit more aggressive in the strikes and the way it's done. It's not as finessed as the struggles are in American wrestling, especially in the 80s and 90s, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the style is wrong or bad. It's just a different means to cater to a different audience, which Japan, for a long time, and Inoki was a big part of that, helped keep the illusion that the athletes, no matter whether they believed that, professional wrestling was real or not, the athletes themselves were the best athletes in the world. Hence why we got matches like the one with Ric Flair and the one with Muhammad Ali, the draw that mixed the boxing and the wrestling. And Japanese wrestling was huge in really helping get wrestling as a whole made on a wider scale because of things like that.
Let me go ahead and grab on this, because I really think, to me, professional wrestling in Japan always evolved from a different style of wrestling, because it was more emphasized on the martial arts and mixed martial arts. Because, again, karate, Taekwondo, all those martial arts, Jiu-Jitsu, all developed in Japan, all really influenced wrestling to be stiff, to be harder. The puro style of wrestling. I can't say it correctly.
It's all good. We're talking about Japanese wrestling. We're two American dudes. Don't worry about it. I'm sure we'll be corrected.
But kind of like wrestling in Japan kind of came along at the same time as America. The 50s really helped with the big star Ricky Dozan. Ricky Dozan is known as the father of the sport in Japan in the 50s and 60s. Up until his death in 63.
Yeah. I mean, and to the point where Dozan was regarded in a lot of ways as a hero. You know, you could almost make the case. We were talking about, Sky, when you sent me, you know, before you left, about how Inoki was really the El Santo of Japan. You could definitely make that case for Ricky Dozan in Japan. You know, before Inoki came along, Inoki just took that legacy and doubled it basically with what he was able to do politically. But
I think honestly, the more I thought about it, the more, you know what, you're right. Ricky Dozan is kind of the El Santo of Japan in that he was the one who really birthed the sport and really created the generation that came after. Because the generation that came after, Antonio Inoki, Giant Baba, Jushin Thunder Liger, the original Tiger Mask, the Great Muda, Masahiro Misawa, the original Kenta Kobashi. All these guys are great wrestlers.
Yeah. And they all had their own unique style. And then even the year after that, when they had Masahiro Chono, who was an incredible athlete and did work in WCW.
Right, and that's the other thing too, is the really interesting experience with American wrestlers and Japanese wrestlers going across the ocean and basically learning the other style. Because that was the thing in Japan, was when you were young, you would be sent to America and learn how to wrestle the American style. And then when you came back, you could wrestle that style in case of gaijun or a white wrestler. Or gaijun doesn't specifically mean white, but given the history of Americans and in Japan, it kind of means white.
It was, well, let's just say statistics were on its side.
But basically, the foreigner heel wrestler or foreigner babyface, whatever you want to call it, would come over and they would basically wrestle the match American or Japanese or a mix of the two, depending on the style.
And you look at the list of names that came across both directions, you know, for a time, especially in the 90s, the names that were going back and forth.
Right. Bret Hart, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man did a couple things. Andre the Giant.
Benoit.
Terry Funk when he was younger.
Eddie. You know.
Eddie, AJ Styles. Even the modern wrestlers like AJ, Samoa Joe was big in Japan.
Well, and you know, it's funny because it's only been in the past maybe like 7 years maybe that it's become less prestigious to have had a stint in Japan. Like, and really, you know who might be to blame for that?
We know who's to blame for it.
It might be the same people to blame for what's going on with AEW right now.
It's the Bullet Club.
Yeah.
The thing with Japan is that a lot of what they do is they do stables. And particularly with New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is the biggest company, a lot of what they like to do is have big stables with like 5 to 8 people in it at a time.
Well, and at this point, the Bullet Club just refuses to die, and that's been a major part of the problem because nobody cares about the Bullet Club anymore. There's no goal to the Bullet Club anymore. There's no aim or direction. They're just, this is our shirts. This is what we do. Here are our shirts. I will wrestle you. And that's basically their whole gimmick.
Like the whole thing was that when the Bullet Club was founded in 2014 under Prince Devitt, a.k.a. Finn Balor, and with Carl Anderson, Luke Gallows, the whole thing was that the Bullet Club was a group of gaijin wrestlers not playing by the Japanese rules. And then AJ Styles came along in 2015 and was the leader. He really emphasized what the Bullet Club was best as. The American-style wrestling taking over in Japan and being the big head honcho. It's just, when a certain person from Canada named Omega came along.
Yeah. And started putting his brand of things all over it. And to be fair to New Japan, they're the ones who used him the best. They are of anyone there, they were the ones who utilized him the best. You cannot deny that. I'm not saying that his matches with Okada were the greatest things ever seen. They're not. They were something.
It's because Okada could really carry anyone.
But Okada is just a once-in-a-lifetime talent. That's really what it boils down to. But the bottom line is, it's just Japanese wrestling and American wrestling have always had a level of a very healthy interplay. And I think what the problem is now is that both overhype the other as far as how good they are, and really there's just a few shining pieces of that. You know, Nakamura was one of the last really big guys to come over, but look at him now. And who was the last guy to go to Japan and feel like he was anything important? It wasn't Jon Moxley.
It was AJ.
Yeah. So it's just hard to say.
What it really is that ever since Kenny Omega himself over in New Japan and got over his style, that's the perception that the Japanese wrestlers had of American wrestlers, is that Ultimate Warrior style. And that's, in many ways, it's very sad, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's unfortunately something that a lot of wrestlers try to emulate now. And that only leads to problems. Unfortunately, that only leads to problems. And, you know, I don't know what the future of Japanese wrestling is, given the current state of affairs. And, like, the people that they're trying to get. You know, one of the people I do really like on their roster is Jeff Cobb. For obvious reasons.
It just feels like with Japanese wrestling, Japanese wrestling is going to survive because they have the fan base for it. They still treat it like a sport. They still treat it with respect. And they still have big-time stars like, again, Okada, Jay White, Tanahashi, Will Ospreay, a couple others. The big thing with it is just the relationship between American wrestling and Japanese wrestling, and Americans going over to Japan, then coming back, and the smarts being like, he wrestled in Japan. That must be amazing. It's not the honor it used to be because the prestige of Japanese wrestling has gone down. And you could say you went to New Japan, but if you wrestle in a bingo hall in New Japan, in Japan in general, is that any different from a bingo hall in America?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that where I saw the gigantic chain of Dick Spot was in a Japanese ring with like 7 Japanese wrestlers. And I'm pretty sure that they had that there was some Japanese show, that was the one where they all just were trying to like grab each other's dicks and like put each other in sexually provocative positions. It was like a 5-way, almost literally match. And it's online, folks. It's on YouTube. I'm sure you can find it. So you think that the outlaw bullshit that is on AEW and on American wrestling is bad? Japan is equally as infested with it, and that's also become a problem. It's something that is equally as hard to avoid in any wrestling now, anywhere. I mean, British wrestling has that issue. They all do. They all in some way do, and I don't know. Is there a remedy? I'm not sure, but I respect Japanese wrestling. We are so spark-noting the history of Japanese wrestling in a major way, and we'll have to do, when we do like territory deep dives, we'll have to take a look into New Japan at some point. And all Japan.
The problem is that there's a lot of history with Japanese wrestling to go through, and a lot of companies to go through, and a lot of interesting events. And honestly, I'm not a historian to be able to talk about those types of things. I do a lot of time and research.
But we will get to that at some point.
Right, it's just a back burner thing. But speaking of back burner, we're going to go to a back burning match. And this was really one of the most interesting matches I could find on YouTube. And really is a good clash between Japanese and American styles in a weird country. Let's go to mid-90s WCW, baby.
What time is it? It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's tonight, watch along with the son of a beat. It's one fall, the down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the baby face cheer, then the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match match of the week.
That's right, folks. It is the match of the week. And the funny thing here is it's not a barn burner. It's a back burner. Because if anyone in that audience said, I don't want to go, the North Koreans would have actually set their backs on fire. And they would have run around and they would have melted. And it would have been a demonstration to all others who did not want to come and watch this incredible showing of two incredible athletes.
Yep. It's April 28th / April 29th, aired on August 4th. It is Collision in Korea. This is a really interesting thing with New Japan and WCW working together with the North Korean government to put on a wrestling show.
And for those of you who have not seen the Dark Side of the Ring episode describing this event, I highly encourage you all to do so. It is a very interesting set of commentary about what happened and the tensions there, but how incredible a show was and how record-breaking it was for the amount of attendance and what a main event it had in Ric Flair and Antonio Inoki.
Right, and it was a show that is not acknowledged whatsoever.
Nope, at all. And is
you know the reason why WWE doesn't acknowledge it?
They don't even want to touch those waters.
Well,
I
those
imagine.
waters, but also the fact that WCW supposedly had 190,000 people appear at this show.
Yeah. They don't want to say that WCW had one of the biggest crowds ever. They will never give WCW credit for goddamn anything. Ever.
Nope.
They couldn't do it with Sting 12 years after the fact. They still couldn't let it go. So, I'm not surprised in the slightest that this doesn't get acknowledged by WWE, but the commentary, speaking of things that I wish I didn't have to acknowledge, the commentary of Bischoff, Mike Tenay, and the third guy who represented Japanese wrestling, and I can't remember his name now.
Did you need to know his name?
I would have liked to for the sake of this exact moment, but I do not remember his name. He barely talked because Bischoff couldn't stop talking. But
Kazuchika Ishikawa?
There we go. Now
he spoke in Japanese, so it doesn't matter.
Well, and he was also talking to Bischoff as well, as Bischoff and Tenay, but it was very clear because they started off and acknowledged that this had already happened. So Bischoff and Tenay were actually doing commentary in the studio. And what did you think of that? That it was an acknowledgement of the past, that this has already happened and we're covering it now, as opposed to calling the match as if they were doing it live.
There's no way in hell Eric Bischoff is going to fly to North Korea.
Well, and whether he did or not, but it's not even that. What did you feel like that helped the match or hurt the match long term as far as the way that you watched it and how they were describing what was going on or what had already happened in some cases?
Well, Eric Bischoff's commentary in general sucked. Let's just call it for what it is. Mike Tenay was very good. But
Bischoff was trying, but he was trying too hard. He was trying way too hard, and I think that ended up being kind of a problem. His whole him blowing Hulk Hogan in the middle of the match was unnecessary.
Well, that's who was supposed to wrestle this show originally. It was supposed to be Hulk Hogan versus Antonio Inoki.
Right, but Hogan was not gonna do no jobs to Antonio Inoki.
Well, also, and this came out in an interview later, Inoki said Hulk Hogan was very safe. Didn't feel like putting himself in danger.
Yeah. And I'm not really surprised by that either, to tell you the truth. And
basically, long story short, Hulk Hogan is a bitch.
Yeah, but we all know that at this point, don't we?
Yeah.
And, but what was great about this match was just how long it took for them to actually do anything. This is how you milk a match to build up tension, is them surrounding each other, almost getting in the collar and elbow tie-up, just kind of staring each other down, being cautious, being understandably cautious. I love that about this entire first sequence here, how long it takes to the collar and elbow tie up, and the fact that they, acknowledge the fact that they're cautious and they're really taking their time. If you're going to have a long match and you're trying to do something like that, that's how you milk for time.
Yeah, I think it's also just like they were pacing themselves, because at this point, Antonio Inoki is at the end of his career. He's 52 years old. Ric Flair is also getting to the end of his... No, not actually.
Well, he's getting to the first end of his career after, 4 more that are coming, but...
Yeah, but Ric Flair was not getting any younger either, so...
No, and, this... that never stopped Rick. It's still not stopping Rick. For Christ's sakes. We had a match this goddamn year. One of us could have taken Ric Flair on the ad drops.
We still could take him on the ad drops next year.
I'm shocked neither of us didn't.
Well, I think I know who I'm going to force you to have next year.
Yeah, no, I'll use them. Don't get me wrong. Just wait till you see what I'm doing with Stone Cold Steve Austin. I'll use him. Don't threaten me with booking. You know how that ends.
What, you're gonna give Flair a stunner?
No, his stunner wasn't that good the first time he did it.
Yeah, but I will say this: I like Ric Flair in this match more than in previous matches. I think there was a lot of really good stuff that Ric Flair was doing. The technical stuff was fun. Also, his healing was very good, and I finally found that I liked when he did the Ric Flair bump.
This match felt far less formulaic. And I think it's more majorly in part to Inoki also interjecting his style into what Rick likes to do. So it's not like Rick had to go through the general paces of an American style match. He could do a little something different, like what Tenay called an STF, but was not an STF. But it was that double leg grapevine where he did chin lock that he put in on Inoki, which was cool. Flair was changing it up a little bit. He still did most of the stuff he likes to do, but he was able to disperse it well enough within Inoki's shit that it didn't feel like we were watching another Ric Flair match.
Right. It's just like Ric Flair has a set of spots that he's going to do in every match. But it's just this match felt like he was spacing it out better and doing other shit.
Which was nice. And Inoki, I really was watching him because I've barely watched any Inoki matches at all. And this may actually be my first, to tell you the truth. And yeah. It's the interesting thing because Inoki, his selling isn't in his facials, but his body language selling is incredible. That's where he nails it. I think that he does get some in the visuals of his face, but a lot of what his selling is body language, and it's really well done for someone his size to make Flair look like he is going to and can beat a man that much larger than him. That takes skill, and Inoki really did a good job of making Flair look equally as dangerous as Inoki did.
Yep, I really liked Inoki. His offense is really interesting. Like when Flair has Inoki's arm, Inoki's on the ground, and Inoki just keeps kicking him in the head.
Yeah,
that's so interesting and unique. Inoki stands out because, again, we've seen so much American wrestling in our lives because, duh.
Yeah.
When you see something different, it's really cool.
Yeah, and another one, that's something I'd never seen before, is Inoki powering out of the figure four. Just literally being like, I'm just going to rip myself out of this. How many people just rip themselves out of a figure four that isn't the Miz's?
When it comes to Ric Flair, there's not many.
Not when it comes to Flair, not many. And
right.
that's...
And then when Ric Flair tries to go back for the figure four, Inoki tries to roll him up.
Yep, and that was also really well done. And it was... These two really had quite a good chemistry with each other, considering their styles were so different. they really were able to meld them well to get the crowd as invested as we could hear them. You could see them moving, but they weren't mic'd up very well.
Yeah, and also just because of the camera angle and the weird movements, it wasn't the best. Like, you could see everything that was going on.
And at that point, it was the end of the night. It had been like a 2.5, 3 hour show, so people were tired too on top of that. But you could still hear them cheering for Inoki.
Well, the thing that actually was at this show, there was no reaction to almost the entire show except for the main event.
Yeah.
Because people didn't really care about the undercard.
No.
They really didn't care about the undercard.
There was nothing about the undercard to care about. You know, sad to say.
Yeah, it's just like the match that people cared about was this one. I mean, it's kind of the same because you got like Bull Nakano on there. She's a really good wrestler.
Yeah.
You got the Steiners in there. You got Masahiro Chono and Scott Norton teaming up together. That's a fun tag team.
That is a fun tag team. And it's just, and then I love when, you know, again, small things, time limits mattering. When you hear 10 minutes has passed and they're both like, oh shit, and they just start fighting, like fist fight. They're like, okay, no more wrestling. We're just starting to beat each other down. I loved that. That was so good. They're like, oh, time to kick it in high gear. And instantly you could feel the energy of the crowd boost up.
Right, because I think the match only had a 20-minute time limit, right?
I think it might have been 15 actually. It was something like that.
15.
It was because
there was definitely a time limit though, because they kept announcing the times both in English and Japanese and Korean.
Yeah, which was, you know, really nice, and you know, you could feel the mood, you know, prior to that when Flair got the chop block. You could feel the mood tense in that room. Like you get, as soon as Flair got that chop block, it started really hitting Inoki's legs. You could feel people really wanting to boo Flair. And that was something that was really, it was very interesting how you could feel the tension in that mood immediately change. But then when they picked it back up, the crowd really got into it as much as, you know, as much as they could. And
yep. Ric Flair goes to the top rope and can't hit anything from the top rope once again.
It's the classic Flair top rope tumble.
Yep.
Flair selling is always great. But then something happened on commentary. And I wonder if you caught it.
Tell me.
So, inevitably, I knew that this was going to end up happening because they start out this matchup going, well, this is what happened and this is the main event and we, you know, it was a hell of a matchup and this is what started, you know, we're not going to tell you what happened just so you can enjoy the heat up of the matchup. But then, so they go through this whole thing as if it all happened in the past tense. Then they get to the last 5 minutes and they have to start calling it like it's happening in real life. And now they have to change, they have to do the time warp and go back to the present to be like, oh, look what Inoki did. Oh, here comes the cover. Did he get him? No. And it's like, well, you kind of already ruined whether that was going to be that way or not because you now have to jump into the present. And that's a no-no when it comes to professional, you know, commentary. And
they probably got too excited by the match and then realized, oh, shit.
Well, and that's why, yes, everybody knows it's recorded, you know, pre-recorded because it happened, you know, because of the days in advance. But why would you ever act like something happened in the past when you're releasing it on DVD? You're doing it in that moment. When you're releasing it in that, whenever you're airing that, release it in that moment like you're there. Because it adds to the moment. If you start calling it in the past, inevitably when you have to call it when it gets exciting, you're going to be in a corner because you're going to be like, oh, he went for this. And unless you're really damn good at staying in the past tense, you're going to start time traveling.
Well, that's what they did. And that's probably something that Eric Bischoff probably did. It's probably something Eric Bischoff started, to be honest.
I think that's just the inexperience of Eric Bischoff in that position. For as much as he was trying to be the commentator at the time, that was just not where his skill set was best suited. And at the end of the day, this finish was beautiful. And
yep. Shall I or shall you?
Please do.
So, Inoki tries to pin Ric Flair. Ric Flair kicks out. Inoki gets up and gives basically a cartwheel kick to Ric Flair's face. Flair takes the Ric Flair bump because he has to take the Ric Flair bump. Inoki goes up the top rope, drops a knee to the back of Ric Flair's head, but then WCW, really, they do a zoom out of the enziguri kick to Ric Flair, and then they do a zoom back in, but it's like you zoomed out to show the kick, but you couldn't keep it zoomed in for the kick.
Yeah, I don't know. Thanks, Kevin Dunn.
He doesn't even work for WCW.
It's still his fault. His one tooth per show.
Fair enough. But it's just like, Inoki kicks Ric Flair, then knees him, then kicks him again. Enziguri was a finish.
But that Enziguri kick looked like devastating. And Flair's selling was phenomenal. He just got whapped and it was lights out. And the cover, and then you actually could hear a pop from the crowd with the pin, and Inoki celebrated, and it was, it was a good match. I just wish we could hear the crowd more, because it was very clear that they cared about this match.
Yeah, it's true. Like, this was a really interesting match at a really interesting time in wrestling. I mean, it got big over at the time, and sadly, we don't talk about it as much as we should.
Well, it's kind of like how we don't talk about a lot of really underrated Benoit matches. It's like the subject matter, the context behind it makes it hard to look back on it fondly without also addressing the context behind it.
Yeah, there's an elephant in the room.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's what this befalls. But this was a fun match, and it's something that I think people who want to see how to blend styles adequately, this is how you do it.
Right, and not what AEW does nowadays.
Which is all garbaggio. But somebody who is not garbaggio is the man we're spotlighting today. Isn't that right, Sky?
Yep, the man we're spotlighting today is a legend of Japanese wrestling. He is Antonio Inoki. This is a man that had a long life and a long career. And it's really interesting life and a really interesting career.
Yeah, and we're going to go through a good amount of this, but also keep in mind, folks, that we are going to be glossing over quite a lot just by the nature of we only have so much time on our program. So,
right. A lot of the history is going to be Spark Note, but it has to be Spark Note.
That's right. So, let's go through it, shall we?
Yep. So, Inoki was born Muhammad Hussein Inoki. That's a really interesting name.
It is an interesting name.
Yep. He was born in 1943. He's the sixth of 7 sons, and also there's 4 daughters. That's a really big family.
It's a huge family.
Yep. But Inoki was a really good athlete when he was young. He was a very good track and field member. He was a good shot putter. He played on the basketball team. He did a lot of karate stuff. He was really good at all the different types of sports, and it kind of shows his athletic ability.
Well, and that was something that he was very well versed in a lot of different methods and means, and he was very fascinated by it seems. Which is why I think there was so much emphasis on the business dealings when he started those, half shoot, half work promotions. That was why that was so important to him, was, demonstrating that various styles lead to like kind of this like super athlete that Inoki almost from the get-go had the skills and talent of being.
Right. Now, one of the interesting things about Inoki is that when he was 14, he moved to Brazil because his family was doing hard times because of the death of his father. He was in Brazil for several years until he was found by Ricky Dozen, who happened to go to Brazil on a chance meeting at a mixed martial arts event.
It's funny how these things happen to collide, especially considering how over Dozan was at the time.
Yep. But Ricky Dozan in the 60s says, come back home and I'm going to give you the best training. And Ricky Dozan brings back Antonio Inoki. He trains with Ricky Dozan and Karl Gotch,
Yep.
who was the big Gaijin wrestler at the time, because Karl Gotch brought his specific American amateur wrestling style
Yep.
and helped teach Ricky Dozan's students that style. One of the classmates of Antonio Inoki was Giant Baba, so they learned a lot under those two.
Yep, and Karl Gotch is a major name in the history of American wrestling. You know, he's a guy who really helped in the 30s, 40s, and 50s really keep wrestling and bring it to a much larger circles, you know, really making it really beyond just fairs and circuses and really starting to draw in thousands and thousands of people.
Yep, and it was on the advice of Karl Gotch that Baba and Inoki tag team in the United States in the mid-60s.
Yeah, which didn't really have major success. You know, it was because, again, with American wrestling at the time, foreign invaders were going to have certain success, but there was always going to be a ceiling.
Right, but that was more about excursion and just learning the American style.
Right.
So when they came back, they could wrestle against the Gaijin wrestlers.
Yeah.
When the big event, though, is what happens in 1972. Late 1971, he's working in JWA, or Japanese Pro Wrestling Alliance, which was Ricky Dozan's company.
Yep.
But Inoki got fired because he tried to take it over. So Inoki said, you know what? Screw you. I'm going to start my own wrestling company, and founded New Japan Pro Wrestling. And as I've stated a couple of times here, what really separated that was the insistence with Inoki that it had to demonstrate a real athletic, you know, MMA back and forth, and really incorporating a variety of different styles, and also has to further prove and demonstrate that professional wrestling has some of the top athletes in the world. And he was fixated upon that being the narrative of New Japan, something they've tried to honor to this day. Yep. His first match with New Japan was Karl Gotch. He faced a bunch of really interesting opponents. There's a match with Luthez in 1975. There's a match with Ernie Ladd in 1975.
Big cat Ernie Ladd. I love Ernie Ladd. He's the man.
Because I think what it was that Inoki had a really good relationship with the NWA, so he could get any wrestler from the NWA to come on over on tours on Japan.
Well, and I think that with what the idea was that Inoki had, that was going to be alluring to a lot of people who were going to try to remain or instill the image of toughness and, you know, really keeping their gimmick alive, going and fighting against guys who are doing actual MMA in a large part in the ring, is going to further add to their illusion of their toughness. And that's why that would be so appealing, and it made good money. You know, he spent there for a while, and it's fascinating how Inoki was able to cross that bridge without necessarily setting foot onto waters that would be considered invasive, because there was a lot of that at the time, especially in the American territories.
Yep, there was a lot of that, but Inoki was a very good salesman and a very good political person, i.e., that was a future foreshadow for his political career.
Well,
but
plus,
we have to talk about the big...
Plus, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Sam Mushnick, as well as NWA commissioner, also had a very keen eye for what was going to be best for wrestling, as far as what territories could benefit from Japanese wrestlers, or what American wrestlers could benefit from going to Japan and coming back and learning a new hold, so to speak, and bringing them more money and being more important to them now that they have more worldwide acclaim. And Mushnick, as widely regarded, at least in my eyes, as one of the best NWA commissioners they ever had, except for obviously Thez, who held the belt like 9 times and basically launched the whole damn thing. And
right. But it was that working relationship, and also Inoki's willingness to teach the Japanese strong style, which really, when you look at strong style, is Karl Gotch's catch wrestling from America, just adapted in Japan.
Right. But Inoki made it inherently his own, though. And that's what makes it so interesting, especially as Baba takes over all Japan and starts to run that. And you have the 2 territories of Japan, really. And while there are other outlaws, those two become really the two big players for the better part of 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, but we need to talk about the really big incident that made Inoki almost a worldwide star. The fight versus Muhammad Ali.
Yeah. Which was acknowledged by Tenay, on which I was impressed with that they bothered to do that, but they had to in order to put Inoki over. And really, kind of as we was talking about before, Inoki had the foresight to realize that if he's going to tout that professional wrestlers are the best athletes in the world, he has to fight another athlete who is widely considered to be the best in that craft. And Muhammad Ali, who was a wrestling fan, was all in on it and in for it. And albeit it's one of the worst things you've ever seen, it really did not look that great.
Well, the whole thing was that they agreed to make it a rigged fight so that it would be a draw. It's just one of those things where there was a lot of disagreements because ultimately no one wanted to do the job.
Which you can't blame either party for that, really. But that wasn't the point. The point was to draw the money and to have the comparison of top name wrestler, top name boxer in the same ring having a fight together. You know, that alone did wonders for wrestling on the whole, American wrestling included. You know, that was a monstrous deal. And which is why, yep. And it's really because of that match and that event, which was genius booking from both boxing and Inoki's side. That really, I think, is the primary reason that Antonio Inoki's death, which just happened recently, was covered by like mainstream news sites.
Right, because he became a name in America because of what happened with Muhammad Ali. Even though, basically, the kicks that Muhammad Ali got from Inoki ruined his boxing career.
Well, I mean, side consequence, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what you went into, you know, when you're going to cross fight like that. You know, who would have thought that was going to happen, but that's the way Inoki was going to be. And, you know, what, another feather in the cap, you know, fine. You know, I'm sure he obviously did not want to hurt Muhammad Ali, but at the same time, oh, well, Antonio Inoki's the guy who ruined Muhammad Ali's career. Those wrestlers must be tough as nails.
Yeah, and it was also the fact that the rules basically said you can't kick unless you're on your back. So Inoki's like, fuck this, I'm just going to kick him as much as I can.
Yeah. And it was something, folks. If you get the time, I mean, for spectacle alone, you should watch it once, but
it's not good.
It's not
good. Fans in attendance kept chanting, "We want our money back."
But the end result of what it did for wrestling and boxing, really, what that gate did for those two entities really propelled Japanese wrestling to another level and even American wrestling to another level. And all wrestling has Inoki to thank in some respect for what it did for putting it on a public stage like that.
Yep.
And Inoki was always involved with those kind of deals because he had the foresight to do that and to keep professional wrestling athletes looking like the best athletes in the world. He had to do things like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was a really interesting entry here. November 30th, 1979, Antonio Inoki defeats WWF Heavyweight Champion Bob Backlund in Japan to win the title, but then loses the Backlund on December 6th. But the WWF president declared it a no contest due to interference from Tiger Jeet Singh. And Inoki refused the title that same day, and it was declared vacant. So what happened is that Backlund defeats Bobby Dukan in a Texas death match on December 12th, but Inoki's reign is not recognized by the WWF.
Yeah, and there's a couple instances of that. I think there was another one too with Flair and I want to say it was Carlos Colon. with the NWA. Yep. And, you know, and so there's the weird instances of that where the mood of the crowd outweighs the actual long-term booking, but then you finish it and you have to go, okay, well, we got to somewhat reverse this because that actually kind of fucks things up. And then they, you know, do something else there, but it's the WWF in a very weird time in their life too, because they're, you know, if we're what year did you say that was? 77?
That was 79.
So okay, so in 79, this is right getting very close to when Vince Jr. was going to buy out his dad. You know, Vince Sr. was going to only be around for another 2 or 3 years. You know, and the houses always did well for them, but they were realizing that Backlund was not drawing the way that they were hoping he was going to draw, the way that the foreign baby faces like Pedro and Bruno had. And that's not a knock or a criticism on Backlund. It's just that it by the numbers, he just wasn't drawing as well. And again, Inoki, being the politician he was, probably convinced or worked through with Vince that was a good move until Vince figured out he had to get it back on Backlund, so it didn't completely destroy him either. I don't know the full details. You know, I wasn't even there. So
it's just one of those interesting points in history that Antonio Inoki was in fact WWE champion, but wasn't recognized it.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to be doing that now that he's passed either.
No, actually they did. When Antonio Inoki passed, Corey Graves made a mention that he won the title, but it's not recognized due to controversy.
Which, I don't know what that is actually a mask for, as far as what really happened there, but, you know, in any case...
It's more or less because they don't want to divide Bob Backlund's title reign, which...
At this point, the end result was the end result with Backlund. I understand for the sake of not wanting to go back into the books for a day-long title. I get it.
Well, it was a week.
Oh, okay, a week. I mean, but in either case, it's not like... I mean, it would only make Backlund look better if he was a 2-time WWE champion, though. Just saying.
Yeah. But the whole point is that Antonio Inoki is so popular because of stuff that happened, like with Muhammad Ali and Bob Backlund, to the point where he ended up getting in politics in 1989 while he was still wrestling.
And was a pretty pivotal figure in Japanese politics for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, because he was involved in one of the biggest things that happened in the Gulf War, negotiating with Saddam Hussein for the release of Japanese hostages. And it was really interesting. Inoki is one of the more controversial people in Japanese politics, but it's weird.
It is, and you know, and we always say like, well, we have Jesse Ventura, but yeah, Jesse Ventura was not nearly as influential on the political sphere of this country like Inoki was. You know, and that's one of the craziest things is that Inoki got around so much. And then the whole Collision in Korea thing that was just a few short years later, you know, diving from one controversy into another, going balls deep, going, don't care, legacy to maintain. You know, and whether that got out of hand for Inoki in the same way that it feels like it has for Jericho and a couple other people who were staying a little bit past their prime and didn't know when to let it go, like Ric Flair, who wrestled a match this year. You know, I think that is something that Inoki did kind of end up having a pitfall with, of not knowing when the line was to be finished and not to cross. And I think in both spheres, both politically and in the ring.
Right, like, he retired, if you want to put initial quotation marks on that, in 1998, but then he had unofficial matches in 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
It's just, again, Antonio Inoki's great, but he didn't know when to give it up until his body told him to stop in 2002.
Yeah. And, you know, and then, again, it's not a knock on anyone who's done that. I mean, their career is their career. And they've earned everything that they've got. And no one, Sky, there's no denying that while Ricky Dozan is one of the most legend, like a god amongst mortals in Japanese wrestling and culture, no one really had as much of a major influence on the entire country and its people quite like Antonio Inoki. And that is something, while El Santo was one of the most beloved figureheads in all of Mexico, El Santo was not a major political figure in major political situations quite like Antonio Inoki was, which is why I said the comparison doesn't quite transfer, because Inoki did more but in a different capacity.
Yeah, I mean, really, when you look at Antonio Inoki, he is the face of Japanese wrestling after Ricky Dozan. And, there's a lot of faces. Again, Giant Baba, the Great Muda, Tiger Mask, so on and so forth. But Antonio Inoki, he not only in wrestling, but just in terms of mixed martial arts and the stuff that he done with helping with that, the stuff with boxing, again, despite how Muhammad Ali in the fight went, and with politics, and his second stint in politics from 2013 to 2019, Inoki had a lot of influence in last year, and he's really one of those defining figures from wrestling. In many ways, he's like their version of The Rock.
Yeah.
He transcends wrestling.
Yeah.
Just in a different way.
Just in a different way. In a different way. But but still, the contributions he did to wrestling and the lengths he went to protect wrestling's image is really what needs to be addressed with Antonio Inoki. And that is something that is invaluable in today's professional wrestling, because there are not enough people with that mindset like Antonio Inoki in wrestling nowadays. And that is something that is genuinely missed.
Yes, and while we do miss you, and unfortunately that we can't watch most of your career because most of it was untelevised, from the little bits we've seen, we could see that Antonio Inoki was a really, really great wrestler. And to a man who had a long life, like, he lived a long time. This isn't someone who died young. He had a lot of opportunity to do what he does. And really, I'm just happy that we got to see a little bit of what Inoki could do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we might be able to find another Inoki match here or there to take a peek at, down the road. I'm definitely more intrigued now than I might have been before about Inoki. I said prior to the show starting, Sky, that I had really little to no knowledge of Japanese wrestling, but Inoki's influence was enough for me to be able to see in what limited knowledge I do have of Inoki, to show that it really is a pleasure to have been introduced to him in this way. I just wish, kind of like how we felt with a few other people who've passed in the past couple years, I wish they didn't take them dying to see him.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sean, can I interest you in something?
Potentially.
Antonio Inoki versus Ernie Ladd from 1974, 2 out of 3 falls match.
Yes. I'm in. You son of a bitch, I'm in.
A future match of the week is definitely going to be Ernie.
Yes, I am all for that match. Even if we don't do it for match of the week, I'm watching that match. Maybe I'll live stream it. Maybe we'll have to live stream. You'll have to stay tuned, folks. Who knows? There's just, it's so funny now that we've gotten a little taste of Antonio Inoki. Now I want just a bit more. Wait a second. Did I say what I think I just said? Skylar, do you hear what I said?
I heard what you said.
What I said, folks, because we cannot leave without adding the plug, because it's out, folks. It's been released. Just a Bit More is out today. October 14th is when it was released. You can catch it on Spotify, on iTunes, or now it's Apple Music, but it used to be iTunes. See, I'm still old and crotchety, but we've got it. We've got the link in the description. The brand new album from White Knux, yours truly, and Abizzle, spelled ABI, say it with me, ZZLE. The two of us, we've been working so hard on this. And November 18th, Mixed Bag to Abizzle's album that I am on a good number of tracks on, the sequel to my album from 4 years ago, Mixed Bag, will become available on all of those same platforms. We have got so much music coming at you at the same time that Skylar's on vacation and I'm doing the opera and working a full-time job. Bam! Down goes an album. I'm really proud of it. If you guys give it a listen, I'd really appreciate it. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe to all of the music that you've got on Spotify. Don't forget to like the artists. Share it with everybody that you know while you're liking, sharing, and subscribing to Court-Martail Podcast. You can do it simultaneously. Hell, put it in the same post. You can add multiple links. I believe in you. But folks, it's an exciting time to be a part of AB Production CT. Come join the entertainment revolution. Rest in peace, Antonio Inoki, and music plug.
Rest in peace, Antonio Inoki. But that is really, really good. And I'm really looking forward to the next show when we have a little bit more time, because we're out of time right now. Sean, thank you for joining me on this little bit of a scratching of the surface of Japanese wrestling.
Well, it's good to have a little retrospective into Antonio Inoki and Japanese wrestling, and we will revisit this topic. You know, I think we still have to go through the AWA. We have a couple more territories to watch at some point, but we've got ACPW and NWL next week, folks. Stay tuned for that. It is 2 shows you're not going to want to miss. I'm ready to go. We've got commercials to go to. Sky, take it home for us.
Yep, and I'm going to promise you something right now. The Acclaimed are going to make their debut on National Wrestling League, which means I will be rapping.
So if that's not enough of a hook for you, folks, stay tuned.
Exactly. And until then, we are going to hit our first commercial break. See you guys then.